Hello, everyone. I apologize for the break in this. Somehow or other, the session ended prior to actually finishing up. We had left off with slide 42 here, language written and spoken. We were talking about the idea of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and we had kind of covered that, talking about how when we think about a word, our ideas about the meaning of that word are shaped by the culture within which we exist. Now, written, spoken, verbal communication is only part of the communication that gets done during human interaction. There's also nonverbal communication, which estimates run anywhere from 35 to 40. Some people say even as much as 50% can be considered nonverbal communication. Gestures, facial expressions, body language, other visual images to communicate. And these things vary by culture. If you think about obscene gestures, right? Like giving somebody the middle finger. That only means what it means in our culture. Other cultures have different ways of expressing that particular sentiment. So when we talk about like the ideas of culture and language, remember when we talk about language as a set of symbols. So symbols are gestures, objects, and words that form the basis of human communication. And for those of you who might have seen the movie V for Vendetta, there's a scene in there where V is talking to Evie, and he says, the building itself is a symbol, as is the act of destruction. So we talk about symbolic interaction and, the basis of communication. It's a shared set of meanings, and people can construct meanings and attach meanings in many, many different ways. It is not just language, the elements of language that have symbolic meaning. We attach meanings to all sorts of things. When we're talking about like communication, of course, the language itself is a set of abstract symbols. Okay, we mentioned norms earlier, right? Established standards of behavior maintained by a society. And we have mores and folkways. We can also think about this as formal and informal norms. Formal norms are those laws which tend to be the mores, which tend to be written down and codified, and a lot of times they have specific sanctions attached to them, punishments as sanctions. Informal norms kind of form the foundation of formal norms in a certain sense. Without informal norms, kind of the folkways, the governing everyday interaction, formal norms become impossible. Because the informal norms are those norms governing everyday basic interaction between people, what we refer to as the folkways. But, things like nowhere is it written down that if somebody extends their hand to you, you should extend your hand, grasp it, and shake it in an up and down fashion. Yet that is the understood appropriate greeting of our culture. It's understood but not precisely recorded anywhere. Again, with the idea of mores and folkways. Folkways are those norms governing everyday behavior. Mores are more along the lines of laws, norms deemed highly necessary to the welfare of a society. Emil Durkheim maintained that if you wanted to understand what was important to a society, look at its system of jurisprudence, because these are the behaviors that are important enough to formally write down and attach formal sanctions to. Those folkways do play an important role in shaping daily behavior. As I said, if I walk up to somebody and I'm meeting for the first time, when I stick my hand out, they don't look at me and say, what do you want me to do with that hand? They understand informally that it's a greeting. So it plays an important role in shaping daily behavior. However, from the feminist perspective, bringing that into there, in many societies, folkways exist to reinforce patterns of male dominance. Just opening doors for women, car doors, building doors, things like that. Yes, it's polite. Yes, it's chivalrous, but it's also reinforcing the pattern of patriarchal dominance in society. When we think about norms, norms are what are generally accepted, but people don't always accept them. When we get to the chapter on deviance and deviant behavior and crime, we'll talk about some of this. Behavior that appears to violate the wider society's norms may represent adherence to a subculture, a counterculture, another group, another culture, but may indicate adherence to a norm from a different group. Norms may be violated because they conflict with other norms. Parents in poverty situations stealing food to feed the children. Taking care of the children is a norm that parents are expected to do in our society, but not stealing is a norm. And we've got a situation here in which one norm is being violated, so another norm can be fulfilled. Acceptance of norms is subject to change. When we get to the chapter on social movements and collective behavior, we will look at how sometimes mass behavior can override norms of behavior that exist prior to it. It will begin writing its own norms of behavior. So we've got norms. Deviance is the idea of deviating from accepted norms of behaviors. Now, deviance can be positive or negative, which is why when we look at sanctions here, we see penalties and rewards for conduct concerning social norms. In general, penalties are going to be applied for negative deviance. Rewards will be applied for adhering to norms, like promotions at work, graduation from high school, getting your diploma, this kind of stuff. It's all for adhering to norms of behavior. But sanctions associated with formal norms tend to be formal as well. So we say that a norm of behavior is you're not to murder your fellow man. The sanction for that is you'll go to jail. It's formally written down. The norms and sanctions, as I said, this is what Durkheim kind of believed, reflect the culture's values and priorities. The norms and sanctions, especially the codified, the formalized, the written down ones, reflect that culture's values and priorities. Value is a cultural belief about what is right and proper and true and good, or what is bad, undesirable, improper, wrong. Values influence people's behavior. They are the criteria by which people's behavior is evaluated. Values change. So change is going on in society at all times. We'll talk about this more when we get to the chapter on social change, but change is occurring all the time. Values change, behaviors change, norms change, attitudes change, beliefs change. The only constant about social change is that it's always occurring in minuscule amounts or in major amounts. But social change is a constant, the fact that it's constantly changing. Culture war. We've got a number of culture wars going on in U.S. society right now. If you think about, we're polarized over same-sex marriage, we're polarized over abortion, we're polarized over separation of church and state, we're polarized over climate change, we're polarized over the teaching of creationism in biology classes, we're polarized over all sorts of things right now. Healthcare. So we've got all these culture wars going on. But in the 1990s, culture war was kind of added into the wider lexicography referred to political debates over abortion, religious expression, gun control, and sexual orientation. And the interesting thing is we see these political debates still going on. 25 years after 1990, we're still debating abortion, religious expression, gun control, and sexual orientation. But when we think about like a wider culture war, if you think about the three targets that were selected, two of them we know of, the Pentagon and the World Trade Towers. The third one was reputed to be the White House. That would have been Flight 93, which went down in Pennsylvania. But it was reputed to be headed to the White House. But if you think about it, those are three very symbolic targets. The World Trade Center representing the U.S. economy, the Pentagon representing the U.S. military, and the White House representing the U.S. government. A lot of people in the Middle East feel that they are engaged in a culture war trying to protect their culture from the influence of U.S. culture, which they feel is being exported wholesale worldwide. Within a culture, there's this idea of what's called the dominant ideology, a set of cultural beliefs and practices that help maintain the interests of the powerful, the elites in society, including social, economic, and political interests. So if we think about something like tax reform, our current tax code, the loopholes are structured to kind of grant breaks to, under the idea of what's called trickle-down economics or supply-side economics. Rich people and corporations get tax breaks so that they pay a much, much lower percentage rate of taxes, with the idea that that benefits society, in that this allows them to create more factories, create more jobs, create more businesses that create benefit for everybody in society. So the idea that we have to protect these tax breaks for the rich really only benefits the rich, because truth be told, anybody making less than $100,000 a year benefits from higher taxes, everybody paying higher taxes. The returns to people from an economic standpoint, they get more benefit out of higher taxes in terms of the infrastructure being rebuilt, in terms of jobs program, in terms of social safety nets, in terms of aid for college students, in terms of all sorts of government programs getting more funding. Low taxes only benefit people making above $100,000 a year, honestly. But when we look at that, the ideological belief that lower taxes benefit everybody can be seen as part of that dominant ideology. Now, one of the things you have to understand is that dominant ideology is a very conflict-oriented idea that comes out of the Marxist perspective, in that the dominant ideology uses those beliefs to protect their favored position in society. The dominant group, rather, uses those ideological beliefs. So when we start to get back to this idea of a case study, looking at Walmart culture. Walmart is the largest corporation in the world. Walmart controls as much of the global economy as all but about the 20 richest countries. It controls as much as Belgium. So what are Walmart's particular corporate beliefs? Well, what is they keep prices low through low wages and no benefits for the workers. Lack of commitment to equal opportunity. However, U.S. consumers embrace low prices. So Walmart gets away with keeping prices low in the U.S. through low wages and few health care benefits because U.S. ideology accepts that. However, when Walmart starts operating in Germany or in Great Britain or in other countries, they had to learn not to impose that corporate culture on foreign customers and foreign employees. They were expected to give benefits to workers in Germany and in other countries. Okay, again, going back to this idea of social research and looking at policy, bilingualism is the use of two or more languages in a particular setting. Um, a number of states have tried to create bilingual education programs, um, but only as a means of teaching children from other countries who speak a foreign language enough English to get them on track. The idea is using the native language of these children to get them up to speed in English. It's been difficult to actually gather the research determining whether or not these programs help foreign kids learn English. So we need to do research, right? But first of all, we have to look at kind of theoretical approaches. The idea of functionalism would be the language is one of the things that creates social cohesion. There's this idea of the language of subordination. Subordinated language represents minorities seeking opportunities for self-expression. Socially, bilingualism, especially in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, began to be viewed as an asset. However, it is not without its critics. It is not without controversy. A lot of people oppose bilingual education and bilingualism. It has policy implications in efforts to maintain kind of English as the dominant language here in the United States of America and programs to enhance bilingual education. One of the things that people oppose is creating conditions sometimes where we can use other languages and settings other than English. There are people within the United States of America that believe if you're going to be in the United States of America, you should speak English and be committed to learning to speak English. In fact, that is one of the criteria for the naturalization process. So when we think about this, other nations vary dramatically. Nations around the world vary dramatically in tolerance. When we think about English-speaking nations, the public concern over the decline in use of English is viewed as somewhat overblown by people in certain nations because English is the language of power on a global scale. And people will continue learning English because English is a language that exists in a lot of high-income industrialized nations. So how should this affect policy? Well, when we think about bilingualism, we shouldn't react in a negative fashion worrying about linguistic purity because it's one of the things that bilingual education, the way that it's been implemented, can be used to facilitate assimilation into English usage educationally. But these are some of the concerns when we think about policy as far as bilingualism. All right, this was the conclusion of Chapter 3. As I said, I'm sorry, somehow we got cut off in the middle of covering Chapter 3, so there will be 2 recordings that I will get posted here. One last time, my name is Matthew Howell. I am at the Valparaiso campus of Ivy Tech Community College, the full-time sociology instructor there. You can reach me at mhowell1 at ivytech.edu. That is MHOWELL1 at ivytech.edu. Next week, we will be covering chapters 4 and 5 in our lecture. We will also be moving to Monday lectures, and Monday will be the regular time for our lecture. So we will be meeting again on Monday the 26th at 1:30 p.m. Central Time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time.